Hello, and welcome to Public Affairs Now, our super local look at what's going on in the Maryland General Assembly and the Arundel County Council. In this episode, we will continue our coverage of the 2016 General Assembly session. Our guests today are Len Lazarick from MarylandReporter.com and Delegate Herb McMillan. Thank you both for joining us today.
Good to be here.
We are now starting to learn more about Governor Larry Hogan's plans for the budget this year. Let's take a quick look at what he had to say at the General Assembly at his annual State of the State address.
Thanks to every person in this chamber who knows the great potential and promise of this state. Together, we have spent the past year working toward that potential. And because of that, I'm pleased to report that the state of our state is now strong and getting stronger every day. Last year, I challenged each of us to put aside partisanship and to work together on behalf of all Marylanders. And together, we answered that call. Because of it, we have made incredible progress. And we have the will and the support of the people solidly behind us.
Len, could you give us some highlights of the governor's speech?
Well, the governor's speech, I got an embargoed copy, the reporters did, and as I read it, I thought, oh, this is a very conciliatory speech. It has a different tone than last year. There wasn't a lot of news in it, all the programs. This is a problem with the State of the State because it comes 2 weeks after his budget and legislative package, and I thought, well, this, you know, Democrats should be happier with this, but they weren't really much happier with this time, and I've kind of figured out the problem that they have with Governor Hogan is that he's a Republican, as opposed to whatever he might say. Yeah, he did take credit for some things that they did and he didn't do, and he thanked them for helping him you know, give more money to schools, even though they basically forced him to do it. But in any case, he did what governors do, and they're just not happy that they're still unhappy with $68 million in education funding. And so, even though you know, he was much more, he used the word together 26 times in the speech. He said bipartisan 6 times. He made all these gestures, and basically for a lot of the liberal Democrats, it doesn't make any difference. So,
what would you say are the top 3 priorities from a policy perspective?
Well, he's asking them to control spending and to pass mandate relief, so he's not forced to spend more money. Any governor is not forced to spend more money than the revenue that comes in. He's asking them for a major change in redistricting policy, so we won't have as many gerrymandered congressional districts. And he's asking for some tax cuts that are actually pretty small. The earned income tax credit, more exemptions for retirees, tax credits for new manufacturing facilities.
I think that the governor's speech this year was intended to be conciliatory. And candidly, listening to it, I think he gave those on the other side of the aisle much more credit than they probably did deserve for the successes that he's experienced. I mean, last year it was the governor who wanted to rein in spending and had to fight tooth and nail to do it with the legislature. The result of that, well, this year we had a $400 million surplus going into the budget. The reduced spending also, we saw a very strong increase in jobs, 51,000 new jobs. So the governor, in my view, is coming here from you've heard the adage, speak softly and carry a big stick, you will go far, Teddy Roosevelt. The governor's actions in the last year have brought him to a place where he can speak in a conciliatory fashion. Last year he said, and he's reiterated this, if you fence off money to use for things and it's not in the budget and I don't want to do it, I'm not going to do it, and I'll use the money to reduce the deficit. And he did. That's using the big stick. Yesterday he came in and he talked about things we could do to work together, and was very great about sharing credit for some things that honestly the legislature had very little to do with. So I think it was a fine speech. I wasn't surprised that people were going to disagree with it after it was over. It just goes to show you, you can be conciliatory, you can share credit, but at the end of the day, there is partisanship here. And no matter what you say, some people are going to try to find fault with it just because they find a need to be different.
Democratic county executives and Baltimore Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake held a press conference before the governor's speech. The refrain out of that was, "Where's the beef?" from Baltimore County Executive Ken Kamenetz. Here's a clip of Kamenetz.
All right, good morning. There seems to be a continuing pattern with this administration of issuing press releases announcing grand promises, but really with minuscule solutions offered. So it's almost like being offered a Big Mac and you lift up the bun and there's nothing inside. It reminds me of that commercial, "Where's the beef?" So the governor promises that he is going to provide record funding for education. And yet, how much money is in this budget beyond the minimum operating budget that's required by law? Zero. The governor promises and actually bullied all the school superintendents last week before the Board of Public Works that he was going to promote funding for air conditioning in our schools. And yet, how much is in this budget that's devoted to air conditioning in a specific pot? Zero. The governor says he promised that he was going to resolve, after taking all the money away to resolve mass transit problems in the Baltimore region and leaving us stuck in traffic, he promised that he would have a grandiose solution that would resolve mass transit woes in Baltimore region. How much is in his budget that addresses mass transit needs for the Baltimore region? Zero. The governor came into Baltimore City and announced this on behalf of the region that he's going to start solving all of the housing issues in Baltimore City, promising this record $700 million to tear down housing. How much new money is in this budget to do that? Zero. Governor, where's the beef? We're all hungry for results.
Amen. Their criticism amounted to tax relief benefiting a certain constituency at the expense of groups in Maryland who need help. They specifically mentioned the Red Line and money to demolish vacant buildings in Baltimore. Can you tell us more about that, Len?
Well, for instance, the Baltimore City money, and it was reported really around the time of the event, the governor talked about a $700 million program, but as a matter of fact, there was really only a small amount that was going to be dedicated to tearing down the buildings. The rest of the money already existed in a housing fund, but it was going to be targeted to developing new housing in Baltimore City. Now, it's true, it's not the money to tear down the vacant houses is not in the budget now, but the governor's office has said that's going to be in a supplemental budget, I suspect, as a bargaining chip for some other things. They've been beating up County Executive Kamenetz about air conditioning, they being the governor and the controller, and his complaint was there's no dedicated pot of money for me to spend on it, although there's a real question about if there was a dedicated pot of money, whether he would actually spend it. So for Democrats, there's often never enough money. And for Republicans, there's always too much money being spent. So there is a conflict there.
Well,
Herb's probably going to argue with the second part of it.
To that point, you know, where's the beef, really? I mean, here's where the beef was. Last year, you know, we came in facing a $1 billion deficit over 5 years, and we've reduced 90% of that. We came into this year with a $400 million surplus. We created 51,000 jobs that we didn't have last year. There's the beef right there. And so now let's talk about the people who ask where the beef is. We've been given Baltimore City billions of dollars. For every dollar a Baltimore City resident pays in taxes, they get back $1.13 from the state. That's right now. My question is we've been giving you the beef. Where'd you put the beef? How'd you spend the beef? That's what I've got a beef with your beef over. So, I mean, you know, they can say that. And they're complaining that we're not giving them new monies. This from a group of people who cannot count the number of people that are in their own classrooms. Look, we have been sending a lot of money to Baltimore City, and the governor is going to make sure it goes to the right places. But the bottom line is this. The delegates and state senators from Baltimore City have done a great job in bringing revenue to Baltimore City. The mayor and the city council have fumbled the ball and have not spent it well. So I think before they start throwing stones at the governor, they might want to take a look at the glass house they're living in.
Except for the partisan element of what Herb said, that's a fairly accurate description. I mean, they complain about the Mayor Stephanie Rawlings Blake talked about $70 million in education funding withheld. Well, that was statewide to about 10 different counties. It was only about $12 million to Baltimore City, and we've learned just recently, as Herb was saying, that they've been inflating their enrollment figures. So it's very possible they've been getting more money for several years than they were entitled to based on a declining enrollment and perhaps people being encouraged at the school level to inflate the number of students they had. So, you know, none of these things are terribly simple, but if it was a matter of more money, you know, in Baltimore City, they're spending about $17,000 per child in the classroom, the highest amount in the state, and $12,000 of that is coming from state taxpayers.
I think we've shown a willingness to help people. The governor certainly has said that. I feel that way. And I'm just going to say it again. The Baltimore City delegation in both the House and the Senate, if you want to talk about bringing home the bacon, they do a better job than anybody. It's gotten there. But what's happened once it's gotten there? It's not just getting money, it's the way you spend the money that's so important. And Governor Hogan, I think, understands that. And I think he's willing to work collaboratively with them on this. But the notion that we're simply going to give you more money, I think those days that ship has sailed, and thank God for that. We need to know how the money's going to be spent. It needs to be spent effectively so that we turn Baltimore City around and not just keep throwing money up against the wall and seeing how much sticks.
Let's take a minute to drill down to the super local issues. Governor Hogan said his budget contains $231 million for road reconstruction and rehabilitation. Any idea what that means roughly for Anne Arundel County, Delegate McMillan?
Yeah, that's about $7.8 million, and that's $2.8 million more than last year, about a 50% increase. I think that the renewed emphasis on roads and highway infrastructure is a breath of fresh air. I'm all for public transportation, but for the last several years, more than half of the transportation budget has been going into mass transit, and 90% of the people in the state don't use mass transit. They use roads. So I think this is a lot better use of resources. I like that while we're going forward with one of the lines in Montgomery County and Prince George's, those localities are kicking in more money for it too, which is as it should be. So I was very pleased with the way local highway user fees were distributed and local monies in general.
One of the key elements of the governor's budget is that unlike the previous administration, which faced a very bad recession and declining revenues, and they raised taxes, but one of the other things they did was transfer a lot of special fund money into the general fund, and one of those pots of money was the highway user revenues that the counties, including Anne Arundel, used for local roads. This is money that comes from the gasoline tax that, of course, everybody in Anne Arundel who drives a car pays. And so this money is going back to the counties the way it had for decades.
You know, one thing that's important, too, with respect to this budget is all of the special funds, not one of them, no money was taken from them. None of them were robbed. They're all going to be used for their intended purpose. Both Transportation Trust Fund, program Open Space. And, you know, with respect to education, fully funded for the first time in a decade. And you can say, well, that's because the mandates require it. The mandates required it for the last 8 years, but it wasn't done. I'll tell you what this shows. If you want to fund education in the future, you've got to deal with deficits in the present. And that is what Governor Hogan did last year. He dealt with the deficits in the present, and presto, look, now we have enough money going forward to do the things we need to do with education and everything else, and we're still talking about tax cuts. I think it's a great thing.
We are about 1/3 of the way through the 90-day session. What happens next, Len, from a process standpoint?
What happens next is that they really get to work. Only about 2/3 of the bills are in. We've had very few bills, particularly in the House. The House hasn't had hasn't had many final votes on bills. So it's kind of been a relaxed space as we get started, but as we go through February and then into March, it's kind of like the end of semester sort of rush. The days get longer. They meet more often, and it becomes harder to keep track of, and the important stuff happens.
Delegate McMillan, could you tell us about a bill that you are sponsoring this year?
Well, one of the bills I'm working on has to do with recovery homes. Most people are aware of the fact that we've had a big problem with addiction, particularly opioid addictions. And we've had these recovery homes, which are neither halfway houses or treatment centers, spring up throughout Anne Arundel County and other places. And really there is no definition of one. And it's caused some problems in neighborhoods, but also as importantly, a lot of places are billing themselves as recovery homes without really meeting that type of a criteria. So we're going to try to set some standards for recovery homes so that people who are recovering from addictions will know that they're legitimate places that they can go for help, and also that people in the neighborhood will know that they're legitimate as well.
Do either of you have any predictions about what will happen with some of the key pieces of the governor's budget? Let's start with you, Len.
No, I don't make predictions. What I say is I have hard enough time getting the facts straight for things that have already happened, no less telling you what's going to happen in the future. I think that winds up being pretty dangerous. You know, like Trump winning in Iowa.
I don't really have any predictions either. Honestly, I think it's interesting. The governor was tested last year. They have found him to be a man who means what he says. He will not be rolled. If he can't get what he wants, then he was more than content to wait till next year to get what he needs. And that's a good place to be going into a negotiation, I think.
Now for our political junkies out there. Might we have seen some previews of future political matchups? We saw Catherine Pugh give the Democratic response to the governor's speech, and we saw county executives Ken Kamenetz and Rushern Baker with some spirited criticism. What should we make of all this, Len?
Well, should we make all this? Well, of course, Kathy Pugh is running for Baltimore as she did before, and Kevin Kamenetz is term limited in Baltimore County, and is very likely going to be running for governor next time, which is why you would have to say he's been targeted somewhat by Francho and Governor Hogan, Comptroller Francho and Governor Hogan, but also he gives as good as it takes. His where's the beef recycled from over 32 years ago, I think, Walter Mondale.
Yeah, well, you know how he turned out. Yeah. No, it was Walter Mondale.
Wasn't that a Wendy's commercial?
It was, yes, right.
Didn't work too well for Mondale.
I think both of them would prefer to run against Kamenetz if they were running again.
You know, one thing about the where's the beef thing, you know, it makes me laugh. You have his record for the last year. You have the governor's proposals already down. What's he supposed to get up there, read the bills to the people in the assembly? You know, you speak in poetry and you govern in prose. The prose has already been submitted. We all knew about that. So he was coming in, just basically reaching across the aisle, you know, trying to make people feel good. I look at Catherine Pugh. Of course she's running for mayor. This is a great opportunity for her to get herself out there for the mayor's race, much more so than a governor's race. I think that the people on the other side of the aisle are trying to figure out who they might run. The governor was speaking to the people of Maryland. He was speaking to Republicans, independents, and honestly, moderate and conservative Democrats. The people who are answering him are talking to a liberal base, because the people over here are liking what this governor's doing, and they'd like some more of it. He's trying to give it to them. They ought to get on board.
Never a dull moment in Annapolis. We'll be sure to update you as the session rolls on. Thank you to our guests, Delegate Herb McMillan and Len Lazarick.
Always a pleasure.
You can read Len's dispatches from Annapolis by subscribing to MarylandReporter.com. You can also like his Facebook page for regular updates. We'll see you next time.